Thinking we're live, y'all. All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Gerald. I'm here with the Waypoint team, specifically Clint, an engineer on the Waypoint team. And we got some pretty fun stuff for you today around Waypoint and Kubernetes. It should be a good time. So, if you have any questions specifically, we'd love to hear from you. Just remember a couple things, please, in regards to our community guidelines. Just be welcoming, be inclusive, friendly, and patient. Be considerate, respectful, and professional. If you want to know more about that, the link is below in our community guidelines at hashicorp.com/community-guidelines, where you can review that. So now we're going to get into our office hours. Clint, could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Clint. I'm an engineer on the Waypoint team. I've been with HashiCorp for a few years now, and I specifically work on Waypoint core and the open source product. So
awesome, yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you. So I guess we already got some folks in the chat, but we can go ahead and transition to the beginning and take it away, Clint.
All right. Are they seeing my screen? What's happening here? Oh, Lord.
There you go.
There we go. Okay. Was not ready for that. All right. So Waypoint is our product to help developers have a seamless deployment strategy, and similar to how Terraform lets you abstract away infrastructure things, Waypoint is a tool designed to help developers easily deploy to various different environments without a lot of complicated tooling. We want to have a simple configuration file, enable people to deploy things. We primarily focus on containerized environments, and lately we've been putting a lot of emphasis on our experience on Kubernetes. So what I'll be demonstrating today is just working on my local machine, but it is a Kubernetes example. And I'll be showing some integrations we have with some other HashiCorp tools, namely Terraform Cloud and Vault for some secret storing. So the way Waypoint operates is you install Waypoint on a server. In my example today, we'll be doing that in the same Kubernetes cluster. And it has a server and runner architecture. So the server will be like a central hub where you can I'll show the UI there for my demo application. For viewing applications, doing monitoring, examining infrastructure, other things like that. And the runners will be deployed into different Kubernetes clusters. In this example, it's in the same Kubernetes cluster, but optionally it can be deployed into various different Kubernetes clusters. And the runners themselves operate and perform tasks like polling for changes in Git, like specifically I'll use GitHub, other status reports or things, and then also creating dynamic on-demand runners to isolate and do build operations. So whenever I demonstrate a build, that'll be happening in a specific pod that's going to be spun up just for handling that build process to work for isolation and performing single operations in contained pods. So Waypoint itself, you define your application in a configuration file, and you define what we consider our basic lifecycle events. So in an application, you're going to define a build phase, a deployment phase, and a release phase, and you have several options there. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of dive into this Waypoint file. Actually, what I'll do first is the demo application was written by a colleague of mine. It's a simple link URL shortener, and we have version 1 up for now. It's running on my local host, but we have other ways of viewing it. So looking at the web UI, this shows like a summary of our deployment. We can see the resources that were created. We had a pod, we had a Kubernetes deployment, there's a service. We have logs from when the deploy happened. And we're going to take another look at these whenever I do an example. So We have build logs, release information. We might look at some of those more after I actually do the build. So looking at a configuration file, this is in the root of the project itself. So you see here, the demo project is a Golang application. It uses JavaScript frontend for it. And so there's a Docker file which explains how to actually build the application, and some other just files related to how the application runs. And then specifically, we have a Waypoint HCL file. It's kind of analogous to like a Terraform main file, if you're familiar with Terraform. So here in the configuration file, we define our application. It's called shurls, short URLs. And we describe or explain some basic things about it. It's just in a dev environment. These are labels that are going to be applied to any pods that are part of the deployment. These don't actually mean much. They're just here for an example. Configuration, this block here defines environment variables, or this block defines configuration for the running application, not for actually Waypoint or how the Waypoint server or runners will actually build or deploy. This is actually for the application itself. So we're defining environment variables. It's going to have a Mongo URL, and it's going to have a port that the Golang application is supposed to listen to. And these are currently defined by variables, which I'll cover at the end of this file. As I mentioned, we have distinct phases. So here we're defining the build phase. We're using the built-in Docker builder, which is just going to read the Docker file and use that to build our Docker container. The Docker file is very simple. It just compiles the application and copies things over. For our registry, after we've built the Docker image, we need to push it somewhere publicly. We need to push it somewhere so that the next phases can actually access the image, the Docker image. So in this instance, I'm pushing it to a personal JFrog instance. And I've defined a username and password that are also coming from variables that are going to be supplied. These come from Vault. So again, I'll cover how that happens later in the file. After the build phase happens, we push that image up to a registry that we have access to. We're going to move on to the deployment and the release phase. Both of these are very minimal right now. For deployment, I'm just saying we're going to deploy to Kubernetes. It's going to use the Kubernetes instance that it's on, or the cluster that it's running in. And here is this is another variable. It's a Kubernetes secret that tells the container that's running, the application container, how to pull down the image that we pushed up here. So that's coming from a kube secret. And then we come to the actual release process, which is the deployment will actually create the pod for it to run. But the release process could be, in this instance, it's really simple. It's just using Kubernetes, and we're just going to say, hey, switch over the built-in load balancer and the port we specified to now point to this new deployment instead of any previous deployments, or create this if it doesn't exist. But this could be something more complicated. It could be, say, like an Amazon load balancer or something, and it would change the, like if it was an application load balancer, it would change target groups to point to the new deployment thing. Are there any questions before I continue on? That's the bulk of the application configuration. And there's lots of different options and abilities in here. This was just kind of simplified. I can't see the camera, so I don't know.
No worries. Yeah, I don't think we have any questions as of right yet, so you can keep going.
Okay. So this next block is configuring our runner. The runner that gets spawned, it needs to know where it's supposed to get its information. So this is just a repository. It's on GitHub. It doesn't have credentials because it's a public repository for now.
Hey, Clint, we actually did get one question right as I said we didn't have a question. That's
sure.
All right.
Yeah.
So the question was, can you use Waypoint to directly deploy a public OCI image as is, basically skip any building and publishing of images?
Yes. Yes, you can.
Right.
The builder, I have not done this recently. So I believe the builder is just called Docker pull. You would say build, use Docker pull, and you specify the image. And I believe it just will pull that down. I need to double check that it's the Docker pull one, but I'm 90% positive that yes, you can do that. So I can only speculate that the question is related to, like, if I already have an existing like CI type pipeline system, can I integrate or use Waypoint for certain parts of it? And I believe the answer, assuming that was an underlying question, is yes.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So the runner block just says this is where our data lives. And so now this is where the variables are defined. So this variable is basically set, and it's just given, it's called registered credentials. It's a Kubernetes secret. And so this is already set up in my Kubernetes cluster. It's just a username, password kind of blob thing. Normally you could get that from Vault as well, but I was just trying to demonstrate the flexibility. You can use Vault secrets, Kubernetes secrets. Probably don't want to put the secrets directly in the configuration file, but you could if you really wanted to. Don't recommend that. Variable port, that's just for the load balancer. So other parts here, both registry username and password are coming from the same Vault key value store. If you're not familiar with Vault, it's a secret manager. It can create dynamic credentials. In this example, I'm just using the key value store. So the runner is able to connect to Vault, and based on an existing token that I've supplied the runner in advance, and it has permissions to access this secret path, and it will grab that and it'll extract in this instance, the password and also the username, and it will populate the Waypoint configuration variable I mentioned above, right here. Whoops. It will populate these fields.
Awesome. I got another quick question if
Sure.
If you're up for it. So the question is, can you elaborate a bit on the pros of Waypoint in comparison to Helm charts, or any company which already ported to Helm charts? What's the reason to consider Waypoint?
I can approach that. I don't have a ton of experience with Helm. So in my understanding, Helm does not do any of the build process. I hope I'm speaking correctly there. Helm helps you with like templating and then deploying things in that manner. And you can then like update the Helm script, right? To like, say if you pushed a new image separately or your CI pushed it, you would update your Helm and then run the new Helm script, if I'm not mistaken. Gosh, I wish I had studied more and to be able to answer this more elegantly. I think part of it is Waypoint is just meant to provide a more consistent developer experience and maybe minimize how much you have to know about things like Helm, although granted you'd have to know about Waypoint. We're also not strictly limited to Kubernetes. We can, in fact, deploy to things like Amazon, like ECS, like their dynamic container clusters. You could also deploy to, you can do AMIs. I don't know what kind of Google Cloud support we have other than Kubernetes. So I don't know, that's kind of a poor answer. I'm not really prepared to discuss that, I guess.
No, yeah, I was
to answer that very elegantly or very thoroughly. So
I think that was a pretty good answer. I think the high level, right? I'm curious if you agree, the high level of Waypoint kind of being this release orchestration tool for multiple runtimes seems like a big part of what you were saying there across not
yeah, and I feel like most of our products actually, yeah. So I won't read all this, of course, but our website does cover kind of some comparisons. I figured, of course, one of which would be Helm. So clearly I need to review this as well. Well, yeah, and there's a key takeaway. Helm is Kubernetes specific and Waypoint is technically platform agnostic. So,
gotcha.
Maybe also further in the demo, I can highlight some of the additional things we can do there. Like I'll just kind of get right to that, I guess. So going back to this file really quick though, because I only have one more thing, is this Mongo URL variable is actually getting its information from Terraform Cloud. So this is a workspace that I've got, and it has a output set. And so based on, you could, if you're already using Terraform and you have outputs in your state file, you can integrate with Terraform Cloud specifically, and leverage information from there. So.
Awesome.
So, oh gosh, my timer says that was 15 minutes. So I've already done one deployment beforehand, as I showed. And we can see that we've got one up there. So what I'm going to do is Waypoint up. Now, Waypoint, the command line tool will let you do these lifecycle steps individually. So you can do Waypoint Build, then you could do Waypoint Deploy, and then you can do Waypoint Release. Up is a shorthand, so it's going to do all these things kind of at once. I'm going to go ahead and run that. And what it's going to do, we see that we're operating Kubernetes, runner profile. I'm going to hop over here really quick.
Hey, while that's going, we had one question around the secret specifically.
Sure.
Excuse me. Do the secrets end up within the resulting deployment or pod, and also the Docker image?
Okay, so yeah, that's a great question. If you put anything here in this config, like here I've specified environments, so this information is going to be injected into the running pod. So that port, which is a variable, and this Mongo URL, you would consider that a secret, I think. In this instance, because I put it here, yes, it does. Now, if you're looking at these things, like this register username and password, that doesn't even go to the server. The Waypoint runner needs to be configured to be able to integrate with Vault. So I've configured the Waypoint runner to know how to talk to Vault. And then I'll try to go back here. Okay, so if we look at, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around, and I'm going to get to that, a better answer there. So the build is happening here. We're currently in the build phase. If we look here and we look at the pods, so this is the first deployment. This is the Vault thing I have running. This is the long life runner. And what it's done is, and this is the server, the runner is subscribed to the server to listen for jobs. And when it received a job, such as that Waypoint up, it created a new task. And this task is the one that actually has the credential information. Once it's spawned, it is the one that actually went and talks to Vault and gets that information. And it does the build process. So it has the privileged access here, but these two do not. And so it's this, here we're using like Kubernetes native jobs. And the idea there is to isolate who has access to these credentials and who actually sees them. So the server itself never saw those. I believe, yeah. So the server itself only saw when I set up the runner to have access to like Vault, it only saw those things go through and it set them with the runner. And then when the runner spawns these tasks, it actually goes and asks Vault for the credentials and then operates on them. That way the server is isolated in the runner, just to minimize who has access to these things. Because the runner itself, it will do like status reports and polling, but for the actual build operations, the deploy operations, it spawns these tasks to do those.
Oh, I think Clint's frozen.
Oh no.
Although you're back now.
Okay. Did any of my response get cut off?
I think you were just about to run the deploy side. Like it was just popping up, and you weren't really saying much. It was at the tail end, so I think you're good.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So just to try to circle back, the idea of creating these on-demand tasks is to isolate who has access to those credentials. Those credentials are only exported or exposed, excuse me, in these specific spots. So like only in the registry step when we're actually pushing that artifact, do these credentials get exposed? And that's in the Docker job. I'm sorry, the Kubernetes job that's actually doing the build and deploy. And then as soon as that build and deploy is done, that job is terminated, and those credentials do not live in like the Waypoint server process. They're not exposed to the actual running application. So I believe that answered the question. So the Waypoint up has completed. So it's gone through and it's done a whole new build, release, or build, deploy, and release. We can check the web and we see we have a deeply living mullet. Man, that's wonderful.
That's good.
So let's see, Waypoint deployment. I don't, man. You give a live demo with a random name generator, and you get deeply living mullet. All right. So we have currently we have 2 active deployments, ID1 and ID2. This localhost 3000 URL is always pointing at the most recent one. But if we saw here, we get kind of a vanity URL of sorts. That's from our Horizon service. This is pointing to V2. Now, I actually didn't change anything between V1 and V2, so we can't necessarily see that. But how are we on time as far as demonstrating things?
I think we're doing pretty good. You know, we have an hour set aside. So
okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and bump this. And okay, so I changed the text here in the application. And this is the current running deployment. This is always pointing to live. Instead of doing Waypoint up, I was going to go through them incrementally. So when you do like Waypoint build, what you end up with is artifacts. So you can see we have artifact 1 and artifact 2. And when you do the deployments, you end up with deployments, and then you do release list. Yes. And so we can see these things as distinct separate things. So I'm going to do just Waypoint build. Now it's going to go through the same process. It's actually going to clone the repository. I've configured what branch I want it to do. So it's going to pull that down and build the project. And that's going to push the resulting image up to the registry. But in this case, it's going to stop right there because I've only told it to build. If we look at, if we go here, you can see there's 2 deployments, but we're currently working on our 3rd build. And the UI will show us these things. It'll show us the logs as they're going. This takes a minute or 2. So if we have any other questions, this is a good time.
Yeah, we got a really good question that I want to wait for a good time. Did we run into something? You good?
No. I was like, oh no, good questions. I'm gonna mess it up.
Yeah. So how is Waypoint helping in developer experience compared with Terraform Kubernetes providers or similar container orchestration providers?
So the idea behind this is similar how Terraform is trying to consolidate like tooling and the way you interact with different providers in a consistent manner. Waypoint is trying to provide developers a similar common interface and way of writing or deploying your application, regardless of what kind of platform you're going to. In this demo, I'm focusing only on Kubernetes, primarily because this is KubeCon related, and as an early product, we're really focusing on the Kubernetes story here. But we, as I mentioned before, we also support like Amazon EC2, Amazon ECS. We support Nomad jobs. But the idea is we want developers to be able to build, deploy, release across any of these platforms, regardless of whether it's actually Kubernetes or it's an EC2 instance. We want the workflow to be consistent. We want the terminologies and the way you configure these things to be consistent. So if you're a engineering organization and you have some jobs are ran on Nomad, some are ran on Google Cloud's Kubernetes, or some are running on ECS, like you can't use Helm for all of those things. Some things are going to be done differently. Now, as far as that touches on the question earlier about like how is this really different than using Helm? And if you're using like Terraform and a Helm provider, Helm absolutely has its strengths. This is by no means saying that Helm is bad, don't use Helm. It's just, again, it's like provide common user experience that might not quite be Terraform plan and apply. It's just a different way of looking at it. It's more geared towards developers wanting to iterate on their application as opposed to like operators trying to manage and control infrastructure.
Would you? I really like the last part what you said. So like that, the difference almost seems to be between the life cycle of infrastructure in particular, and using a Kubernetes provider would allow you to like utilize a particular config to deploy an application. But Waypoint seems to be more focused on providing a unified workflow for the releasing of an app specifically versus infrastructure.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And we also support something my demo doesn't go into is we also support different workspaces. So if you're a developer and you're working, you want to deploy or you want to just build on your local environment, your local setup of Kubernetes, you can do that normally. And then let's say you're at a point where you want to share something, you can use a different workspace, which is as simple as just like workspace equals dev or something, or staging. And in your Waypoint file, it can be set up such that it can basically switch on the workspace you've selected and say, okay, if you're talking about staging, then I'm talking about a different Kubernetes cluster. I need to deploy out there in some way that I can share with other people. It could be entirely different credentials, databases, these kinds of things. And it's just it's trying to help developers be able to deploy to these various different places with consistent tooling. I'm kind of regurgitating something I've already said. So
no worries. Are we at a good point or you want another question?
I was just going to show, so after, let me ramble for another minute.
Cool.
So I've done a new architect, I've done a new build, but I have not done any more deployments. I still have these other two deployments. So I can deploy, let's see, nope. Waypoint deploy, yes. Trying to remember. Oh yeah, it's like release, isn't it? There we go. So I fat fingered something and made a 2 there. I don't think that's gonna do artifact 2. It might. I don't know if I did that on purpose or not in past. But the point here is I'm doing a new deployment, which is going to create a new pod. But I also, it should also, I think, remove the very first one because I think I have it configured. By default, I think it only keeps the previous 2. But what this will do is it'll give us a new like vanity URL. Maybe I shouldn't say vanity. It's going to give us a new one of these. But it's not going to change the one that this points to. So this still always points to this V1, and this will always point to the V1 until this actual deployment is destroyed. This will always point to the most recent thing that was deployed. And it's kind of hard to illustrate that when I'm using something that says localhost. So maybe in future demos, I need to change that. Okay, so we have a new deployment up. And you see here, we've got this. Okay, so it did pick up the V2 part. So it ignored that 2 on the command line, which is what I wanted it to do. But this is still always going to point to the old one. So Waypoint deployment list. So yes, I still have, I should still also have number 1. So awesome. As you can see here, go on. Yeah. Wow.
No, go ahead. I was just saying awesome. Go ahead and mute.
Yeah. So in the list here, you can see that the little rocket ship emoji says that this is the actual one that's being pointed to by the release. So Waypoint release list. So we still only have 2 releases, and you can see in the we've got ID 2, and it's pointing to deployment 2. So Waypoint release. So release, I'm going to say release deployment number 3 because I've gone and seeing this. This is deployment 3. It looks good. I want it to stay that way, or I want to shift this one over the one that's the local host. I want to shift it over to the new release. So Waypoint release D3, and I maybe talked really fast and glossed over it, but this is just manually stepping through all the processes that Waypoint up itself does. So Waypoint up would just build, deploy, release automatically. Now, the thing is because it's localhost, it likes to cache that. So I'm going to bring up that. So this is a incognito. So incognito doesn't have a cached version. So the localhost is now actually pointing to the V2 version because I did a new release and told it to point to the latest one. So that concludes kind of the stepping through the manual process. We do have integration with Git for like polling. So if you were to push to a specific branch, it can automatically do a release. I had not rehearsed that, but I could probably try it if people are really interested. But it's really not that. Well, no, it's kind of neat, I guess. So is there any questions now?
Yeah, we got one.
Whoops, I just did a new release. Oh, there's nothing to be done. Good.
No, the question is, can Waypoint be used to configure different parts of Kubernetes, such as pod disruption budgets and pod topology constraints?
I think we have limited support for things like that. I honestly, right here, I'm gonna look at the documentation. So it does have a lot of configuration options that I completely glossed over or didn't talk about at all. So yeah, we do have support for setting constraints like CPUs. We do have support for like replicas, min replicas, memory limits. I don't know the intimacies of all of these, but our documentation does cover what we do support. I think part of that question was about topologies, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not quite sure what was meant by that.
And pod topology constraints.
I mean, other than what I've mentioned as far as like CPU and memory, I'm not sure I know what topology means in this context. I apologize. I'm not a Kubernetes expert by any means, so I have working knowledge of it. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not an operator that would probably be able to answer that question better.
Well,
but what we do support is documented. So hopefully, if you go to waypointproject.io, plugins up here, and you go to Kubernetes, hopefully you'll be able to find more detailed answer to your question there. Is there anything else?
Don't see any further questions. Do you have anything else that you want to share?
Yeah. Okay, what I'll do here is, so I cheated and I used previous history. So what app polling is the way we have things set up for monitoring like Git activity. So you can configure your application. It's not on by default. I can show it in the UI actually a little bit. If we go here and go to settings, you can see like here we've got things set up. So this came from the configuration file when I initialized it. It's monitoring this public repo. It's monitoring this branch. But right now it's not actually set up to enable automatic deployments on changes. So I'm going to do that. I could click this, but right now we don't, in the UI, we don't yet support configuring how often it's polled. And I think the default is like 5 minutes or something. So if I turn it on now, I'm afraid we won't see anything for a while. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it on with this command. I'm saying for the project, I'm just kind of reiterating all these things, but I'm saying poll equals true, and the interval is 30 seconds. So now the project is updated. Actually, if we go here, we'll see we are doing that. And I'm going to go ahead and change this I'm going to make it 4 because now it'll actually line up with our deployments IDs. It won't be as confusing. So bump to v4. Now push origin dev. We do have some tools to look at what Waypoint's doing. So I'm going to go Waypoint job list. Oh my goodness. So that's really big. Sorry. Okay. So I actually minimized the font a little bit, or I reduced the font to try to demonstrate this. But okay, so 24 seconds ago, there was a poll. So if I check again, okay. So poll is running. And that operation should kick off. Yep, it kicked off a new build. Now, I don't have that here. I didn't trigger it here, so I don't have the logs right now. And if we go back to the project settings or the project view, we can see, okay, a new build has automatically been kicked off because it noticed a change in GitHub. So here we can access all the logs. And it's going to go through the whole build, release, or build, deploy, release process. And we don't have a lot of, I mean, we'd have to just watch this. It's going to take like a minute or two to actually complete, but it demonstrates the feature of where we push a new git change to a specific branch. We have it set up to monitor a specific branch, and that triggers a new build.
Very cool.
Yep.
Any more questions? I don't think we have any more questions.
Something I skipped over to is we do have support for viewing like logs of the current like deployment, and actually probably other deployments. But this is a live view of the logs. Unfortunately, this demo application does not output a lot of logs. It needs to be updated so that when like URL requests come in, it actually outputs like that's received something. Right now it doesn't, but if your application did, Waypoint logs is a command you can run, which will give you introspection there. You can also see it from the web UI. And we do have, Waypoint Exec does not. Okay, so Waypoint Exec is a way to actually create a shell session in the current running pod. I just have a single pod running, so I think if you have multiple pods, it would choose one at random. And it also kind of just depends on how you've configured the container. So not everything is going to support this functionality, but I can go ahead and I can inside that container, I can see things. But it's a Golang application, so it's all compiled right there into that Shirl's binary. I guess I could talk about the entry point. The entry point is injected into the container, and it serves as a front point to talk to the Waypoint servers. So if I were to say change something in the configuration, maybe like add something here, I think that should dynamically update into the running pods. If I might need to run a command to do that. I forget. But the entry point is a binary that basically gets injected into the container, and it serves as a way of talking with the Waypoint server and pulling down this initial set of environments, and then running your binary or the resulting entry point from your build wrapped in a way that it exposes those environment variables or other things you have configured. Entry point can be turned off if that's not something you want, but it is how Waypoint logs and Waypoint Exec works. So if you decide to turn off entry point, or you could selectively turn off Waypoint Exec, just Waypoint Exec, so you'll lose those features if you don't use entry point. It's on by default, but it can be easily turned off. So
awesome. We do actually have a question asking about if you can talk more about Terraform Cloud integration in Waypoint.
I don't know that there's a lot to talk about other than we have a number of plugins that are configuration sourcers of sorts. So basically, the Terraform cloud integration right now is limited to if you have an existing state file. If for anyone not familiar with Terraform, whenever you have a Terraform configuration file that specifies like a certain layout of infrastructure, and Terraform runs that, it generates a state file. And you can also, alongside your main Terraform file where you describe your infrastructure, you can say, hey, I want these outputs. Take these values from the result of applying my Terraform file and specifically list them at these values. So what our integration here now is, we say, okay, in this example here on the web, we say populate this application's environment. And so this one, it says like, okay, what's my database? During the deployment, it will reach out to like Terraform Cloud and it'll say, give me the output of this username. So the Terraform Cloud workspace has to have that output defined so that Waypoint can go and ask for it and it'll get that username in this example, and then it'll inject that into the environment, well, in this example. So in my example, I did this similar as well. I actually broke it out into the variable, but it just talks to Terraform Cloud and it gets the output. Something I did not show was that I configured the runner to like know what I already pre-configured the runner to know an API key. I didn't show that on screen because I didn't want to show the API key. But you do configure the runner to have that, so the runner knows how to get access. So it's still guarded. You still have to authenticate. And same with Vault. There's a token configured in the runner, and it's documented how to do that. I just kind of skipped over that in the demo.
Gotcha. So just so I'm understanding, the Terraform Cloud integration sources the output for example, a unit of infrastructure like a Kubernetes cluster, that then I can use those outputs to feed my Waypoint configuration?
Correct.
Awesome. Sweet. Cool. Well, hey, we really appreciate. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say the Waypoint job we did automatically via the Git push has finished, and so we can see. Oh no, not that one. Not that one. I need that one to go away. So this will now go away. Yeah, so this one got pruned. It's the first one we had, and I have it set up to only maintain the last two. So now the localhost one now points to V4, and this V2, which is the third deployment, is still up there. If you look here, or releases, right? So this is the most recent release. This localhost will always point towards like the most recent one, but we can see we have these other deployments. But yeah, it did its job. It pulled down the new source and compiled and released it. So
awesome. Well, this is a great demo, Clint. We really appreciate it. There's not much questions. Any closing comments that you want to share with the folks watching?
No. I mean, not really. Waypoint's still kind of a young product. We're still adding a lot of features. We're still trying to, I don't know. There's still a lot of active development. The team is growing. We've hired some really bright people that are already contributing, and I'm really excited for what we can do over the next few years.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'd love to hear your feedback, and we'll go ahead and see you all next time. Bye.